The fundamental thing to know about child sponsorship is that a sponsorship is a pledge. The most often asked question by new Denari users is what connects the sponsored name to the donor? The answer is the pledge, and we'll see how that works in a few minutes. The three main entities in sponsorship are the sponsored name record, the donor or sponsor, and the pledge. We'll look at each of those in part 1 and 2 of this video. If you're just beginning to use Denari for sponsorship, your first task is to set up the sponsored name records. We often use the term child when we refer to these because most often it's children that are being sponsored, but you can also use sponsorship for adults as well. So if you hear the term child, just remember that it applies to any person who you wish to sponsor. The first step in setting up a sponsorship is to create the sponsored name record. To set those up, you'll go to the sponsorship button on the left and then click on sponsored names. First, we see a list of all the sponsored names already in the data. By default, this page only shows you those names that are available to be sponsored. We'll talk more about how that works later. However, you can change that filter to see all of your names by clicking the Only Available Names checkbox here. That removes the filter on this page temporarily so that Denari now shows all sponsored names, both sponsored and unsponsored. We'll click Add New to create a new record. For now, let's skip some of the fields here at the top and move down to the first and last name fields. They're pretty self-explanatory, of course. Across from them, we see the code field, and you'll notice that it has a little red star next to it, which means that it is a required field. This is what Denari uses to identify this record, so it must be unique. You can't have two sponsored name records with the same code. This code can be as simple or as complicated as you'd like. For example, some people enter the first two characters to represent the country of the child. The next two characters might be the year the child came into the program. The next two represent the community where the child lives, etc. Or you can simply start with 1 and continue on with 2, 3, 4, etc. It's up to you how you use this field. It just has to be unique. You can't have two children with the same code. Below that, we have the unique ID field. Denari doesn't really care about this field. It is more for your purposes, and it's a kind of second code for this name record if you need to use it, and you can use it or not. On the contact name field, we have a little red star here as well. It is also a required field. This field can be used in statements and online when needed. For example, if this is a pastor who is being sponsored, you might put Pastor John there. Or you may just put the person's first and last name. That field can appear on your online community page and statements sent to donors, so you can set it up with that in mind. The search string field can be used in searches back on the page that listed all your sponsored names. Some organizations use the last name, first name format for this. You can, of course, also search by last name as well, so in some ways this is a redundant field, but it's available if you want to use it. There are a number of fields like name type and community that use the codes that are unique to you. On down the page here, we see fields like education, grade, progress, etc. All of these are optional, but you will need to set those up prior to entering your sponsored name records. Let's jump out of here and look at how we create those codes. To do that, we'll click on the sponsorship button here on the left, and then down here on sponsorship codes. Here we see a list of all the codes already set up here in the training company. Notice the code group column. Those are the fields back on the sponsored name record. So let's create a new community code. So we'll click Add New. We'll click on the code group community, and then we enter a description. Let's call it your town. We need a code, and again, this just has to be unique, so we can put something fairly simple here. I'll use YT. The rank order field is not relevant here, and so we can skip that, and then we just hit save. Now let's go back to the sponsored name record. And now we can select your town from the drop down, or by searching for it, clicking the little search icon, and simply selecting it there. Now, as we move down the page, you'll see a number of fields that have the little search icons to the right. Any field that you see like that, or if it's a drop-down field, you'll need to set up those codes or those values that are unique to your organization, and each of those fields will be used in the same way. Name type is a field that needs a little bit of explanation. Since you create the codes, it can be anything that you want, but most of the time it's used to indicate types of sponsored children. For example, your organization may sponsor both children and adults, so you could use this field to indicate whether this record is a child or adult by using this field. This field can also be used in the online community site as a search field. Using my example, a donor could come to the online community page and search by child to see only those children that are available, or search by adult to find them as well. Let's skip the e-sponsor field for a moment and come back to that later. The next set of fields are all optional. The gender field is self-explanatory. The fields like postcard date, annual letter, and first letter could be used to track when you send the annual letter to the sponsor, for example, or when you sent the first letter, again optional. The date of field update could be used, if needed, to track the last time you received updated information about this child from the field. The photo date field refers to the last time you uploaded a photo below. If you are uploading a photo for the first time, click on Change Photo to browse and upload. The photo you upload here is the one that will be used on the website if you're using online community. Most digital cameras take huge photos. If you upload them as they are, Denari will use them on the web page. However, when a donor comes to the page that shows several sponsored names, the donor's browser will have to upload each of the very large photos and then resize them down to the size that we set on the web page that looks the best there, usually something like 200 pixels wide. That will make the web page very slow to load. You should resize them to something between 200 and 400 pixels wide before you upload them. The next set of fields, distance to school through dad's occupation, are all optional. Most of them can be used on the website, and we can pick and choose the ones that you want to use when we set up your online community page. The checked out fields refer to the process of setting aside a child. For example, let's say you're going to an event and want to give people there an opportunity to sponsor children at the event. You take the photos and the biographical data for 10 of them. While you're there, you don't want someone else to sponsor those 10 children, maybe from the web page. So checking them out here sets them aside and makes them temporarily unavailable. If one or more of the children are not sponsored, you can uncheck them out later, which again makes them available. You can check out children to either a person or an event. An event here is an appeal code. so you can create an appeal code or set up a name record depending on which you use to check them out to. Both will need to be set up in your data so you can select them here. You can check out sponsored names either one by one or going to that child's record and filling in the fields here, or it can be done for a group of children using the sponsored name segment, which we'll look at in a separate video. The expiration date here is the date that the checkout status will expire. On that date, the child will automatically again become available. The hold fields here allow you to make someone temporarily unavailable. You can select a reason and the date of the hold. The reasons can be created in the sponsorship codes section that we looked at earlier. You might put someone on hold, for example, if they moved from their community and you're not sure they're going to continue in your program. Once the situation has been resolved, you can uncheck the box to make them available again. The origination date field is the date that this person started in your program. There are two status fields here, the system status and status. The system status field is the field that Denari calculates or determines. The status field is one that you can use if you want to give this person a different status than the one Denari assigns. There are some circumstances where that's necessary, but most of the time the system status will be all you need. There are 5 statuses available. First, A, which is available, means that this person can be sponsored. S, sponsored, means this person is fully sponsored. AP stands for available previously sponsored, and it means that this person was sponsored at some point but not now, and they're available to be sponsored again. AS, which doesn't appear here in this drop down but will show up sometimes in the system status field, means available sponsored. That means that this person can have more than one sponsor and at least one person is sponsoring them now. They are available to be sponsored. And then finally, D stands for dropped, and this person has been dropped by you from the program. That simply means that they're not coming back. Dropping them means that it leaves the data in Denari, but they can't be sponsored again. If the child were to return to the program, you would need to set them up again. The next set of fields relate to having more than one sponsor or sponsored per sponsored name. Denari assumes by default that there will be one sponsor per child. If that's true for you, then you don't need to do anything with these next fields. However, some organizations allow more than one sponsor for each child. If that's your policy, then you can check the multiple sponsors checkbox here, and then below that put a number in the number of sponsors allowed field. Let's say that it's 3. These two settings affect the system status field above in the following way. If the multiple sponsors checkbox is unchecked, Denari will consider the child sponsored when there's one sponsor. If the multiple sponsors checkbox is checked, Denari will look for the number of sponsors number. Let's say it's 3. If there's currently one sponsor, the system status will show as AS, available sponsored, and the child will be available to be sponsored. When there are 3 sponsors, the system status will change to S, and Denari will consider the child fully sponsored, and the child will no longer be available to be sponsored, and they will be removed from the website. The sponsorship count field will show you how many sponsorships are currently active. Now let me slide back to the top of the page, and here we see the current sponsors field. It will turn into a drop-down field when there are sponsors and will show you that name information. Now let's talk about online community. If you are using online community, you will have a page that displays your available children or adults on a page. What determines which children will be on the page are a number of conditions. First, the e-sponsored checkbox at the top of the page must be checked. If this is unchecked, this child will not appear on the website regardless of other conditions. However, if it is checked, the next set of conditions come into play. If the child has a system status that the field, and that's the field that Denari calculates, if it has a system status of A, AP, or AS, basically any available status, and the eSponsor checkbox is checked, this child will be on the page. Again, if the eSponsor checkbox is unchecked, they will not be on the page regardless of their system status. If the child is checked out, as we saw earlier, they will not appear on the page, again, regardless of the other conditions. And finally, if the hold checkbox is checked, this child will not be on the page regardless of the other conditions. Let's stop there and continue in part 2 of this video series.